This video is sponsored by Raycon. Is the world opening back up or closing down again? At this point, no one knows, but either way, be it inside or outside, Raycon's everyday earbuds have you covered. These earbuds, first and foremost, are comfortable and don't constantly feel like they're going to fall out, and on top of that, they sport a 32-hour battery life and come in at about half the price of other premium brands. In the end, if you're not satisfied, then fall back on Raycon's 45-day happiness guarantee and simply send them back. Now, this July has been one of the most chaotic months of my entire life, with one terrible situation after another, and Raycon's everyday earbuds have been right there beside me during this crisis as I pace my apartment listening to Inside on Spotify on an infinite loop. You can grab your own pair today for 15% off and use them for more productive things like audiobooks, meditations, working out, and so on by heading on over to buyraycon.com/ReignBot. Again, that's buyraycon.com/ReignBot.
Hey, if you're just joining us, it's now 5 o'clock. This is News 4 at 5. This story's been developing since about 3 o'clock. This is file tape of a man who's got into some bulldozer that he's made into a makeshift armored covered bulldozer, and he's damaged or destroyed half a dozen buildings in Granby, a town of about 1,500, about 50 miles west of Denver in Grand County. So far, we're hearing no one's been injured, but that has not been confirmed.
On June 4th of 2004, a 52-year-old man by the name of Marvin Heemeyer mailed several audio tapes to his brother. Following this, he returned to his muffler shop, gathered weapons, various supplies, and a list of targets, before climbing into a bulldozer that he'd modified into a tank sporting a 30-ton armor shell. The Killdozer, as it's now popularly known as, was complete and ready to wreak havoc on the town of Granby, Colorado. At approximately 3 p.m., Heemeyer crashed through the walls of his own business and struck his first target, the Mountain Park concrete plant that was located just across the street. To Heemeyer, the plant was a symbol of the problems he felt had pushed him to plan his rampage, the details of which were documented in the hours of tape he'd recorded throughout the Killdozer's construction. See, the concrete plant had damaged his business, and when he'd purchased the bulldozer with the intention of building a road to bring in new customers, permission to do so had been denied. The town council was bowing to big money at the expense of everyone else, and Heemeyer was not the only one in Granby who thought so. Heemeyer, as it turns out, tried to take things into his own hands. Acting quickly, the concrete plant's owner attempted to stop the Killdozer with a front-end loader before allegedly being shot at and forced to flee. Minutes later, Heemeyer had already destroyed 2 buildings and several vehicles, but he was not done yet. He then made his way to the highway, at this point being pursued by several emergency response vehicles, one of which being a police SUV that got crushed by the DIY tank. Before the Killdozer could reach town, Undersheriff Glenn Traynor managed to climb on top of it and open fire. But it goes without saying that this was nowhere near enough to stop Heemeyer's destruction. The effort to stop the Killdozer continued, and just about every method of doing so you could think of was attempted and failed. Bullets, explosives, an industrial scraper, none of these were effective, and so Heemeyer pushed on. Keep in mind that while Heemeyer had his list of targets, no one had any idea who or what he was aiming for, so as a precautionary measure, a public alert was sent out via reverse 911. By then, Heemeyer had turned his sights on Town Hall, the very place which had been instrumental in putting him on the losing end of his zoning disputes. Next, he targeted a local newspaper office, one that, in his eyes, did little to bring his complaints the attention they deserved. He'd also bring down the home of a former judge. The judge himself had died years prior, but had ruled against him in the past, so to him, the house in which his widow lived had to go. All in all, the event would last just over 2 hours, severely damage or destroy a total of 13 buildings, and cause around $7 million worth of damage in total. As it turns out, the destruction would only come to an end when Heemeyer ripped through one Gamble's hardware store and fell through into its basement. There, the Killdozer became trapped as damage sustained over the course of the rampage, and the massive amount of added weight from its armored shell had finally overwhelmed it. Marvin Heemeyer was the only person to die that day, having taken his own life when the bulldozer became trapped. Attempts to breach it with explosives failed, and so it took a further 12 hours of work with a torch for law enforcement to get inside and recover his body. Given the monumental task that was getting in, it's safe to say that the perpetrator likely had no intention of ever getting out. Heemeyer's actions left a major impact, not just on Granby, Colorado, but also in the general public consciousness. Heemeyer is often considered a folk hero to some for what they see as his taking extreme measures to stand up to an abuse of power. Perhaps his most infamous quote is, "Sometimes reasonable men just do unreasonable things." This in particular resonates with people, which makes sense given how powerless we can feel in the face of uncaring governments and impossible odds. Now, just how reasonable Heemeyer was, however, is up for debate. His supporters will tout the fact that no one else was killed as evidence of his intentions, though some feel the lack of death was not for lack of trying. It's claimed that Heemeyer shot at gas tanks, which some took as intent to kill nearby officers, though supporters feel it was only intended to further damage property. Others cite the fact that 11 of the 13 buildings he targeted were occupied. Keep in mind, this was all midday and during business hours. A notable example includes a library that was attached to Town Hall, in which school children were present until just before the attack. There was, of course, no way for Heemeyer to know that the building had been emptied, and while we can't prove that he specifically wanted to kill people, if he was truly only interested in destroying property, you'd think he would have done this at 3 a.m. instead of 3 p.m. But of course, there's no way to read his mind.
We'd like to talk now with Bonnie Brown. Bonnie is joining us by telephone. And Bonnie, we understand that you are a friend, perhaps, of the man who is inside that bulldozer. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What can you tell us about this person?
Well, he systematically is going through the different buildings. That is correct, the information about the ongoing dispute with the concrete company. And he went to Gamble's because the person who owns it was on the town council and had to do with excessive taxes on his property that he purchased to build his muffler shop. And he talked with me about doing this back in January, and just in a conversation while we were having dinner. And, of course, I thought that he was just kidding. I had no idea that he would follow through with it and continue.
Bonnie, without giving us his name, and please don't, tell us, when you did talk to him and he was planning this, according to you, did he mention the buildings he was going to hit, the specific buildings?
No, he just said that the people that caused him harm, that he was going to, I'm trying to think of how he put it, that he would pay them back
Bonnie,
for what they had done to him.
Take us again through his gripe. I don't quite understand what he was upset about.
Well, I wasn't really paying attention because I thought that he was just kidding, and he had mentioned something about that he purchased this land to build his muffler store at a public land auction, and that unbeknownst to him, the man who had owned the property and that was losing it was bidding against him, and he wasn't able to exceed the bid that this person had bid on, so he ended up winning the property. And the man actually had annexed this piece of property under the table with the town of Granby, and that Marv didn't know anything about this, and so he tried to sell the previous owner, the land back, and he didn't have enough money.
The year of the attack had also seen Heemeyer's father pass away and his romantic relationship fall apart. This, in combination with his zoning grievances, which dated back as early as 1992, may go some way to explaining his state of mind. Heemeyer, as it seems, had begun to believe he was enacting God's will, and even took the fact that no customers questioned the makeshift tank he was working on as a sign he was being protected by a divine force. Among the material he left behind, he said the following, quote, "God bless me in advance for the task I'm about to undertake. It is my duty. God has asked me to do this. It's a cross that I'm going to carry, and I'm going to carry it in God's name." So, whether or not you think Marvin Heemeyer is a hero or a villain, it seems the authorities were able to predict his infamy. The remains of the Bulldozer were broken down and carted off to several undisclosed scrapyards in an effort to avoid would-be collectors seeking out mementos of his rampage. This video was researched and written by Lux Noctis and edited by Darkfire Productions, with additional writing and editing by yours truly. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.